3 different ways to use the dungeon room terrain that I created 2 videos ago. But first, hey everybody, welcome to Craftniks. I'm Nick, tabletop hobby spot craft and everything from terrain to the game. And in this video, we're going to talk about the terrain for the game, or talking about crafting the game with the terrain. We're going to do both. Anyway, we're going to talk about 3 different ways, and we're going to break them down into subcategories here. We're going to talk about the first one, which is the generic closed space or negative space, as many moons ago Runehammer had described it, and I believe it's in the core book too. But we're going to talk about closed space. We're going to talk about open space, which is basically the opposite, which is your positive space. And then we're going to talk about a third one that is in its prototype, but I'm excited to really hit the table with it, and I'm just going to share it with you even before testing this. So it's called the hybrid space. And for that one, I don't have a more clever name. So as you're watching the video, if you come up with one that I could use, please let me know. Name it down below. As far as the dungeon rooms, I'm going to have a link somewhere, maybe somewhere. I don't know. Let's get into it. Alright, so the first one we could talk about is closed space. And this one's pretty straightforward. Everyone uses it. You see it everywhere. This is when you're in the dungeon, right? And this is why we make the dungeon tiles, so that we lay them out in a way so that they can explore, our players can explore the dungeon. But this is a closed space. You're assuming that all of these walls, now minus the ones where you actually make the walls, like maybe the Wylock tile or something from many moons ago. Again, I'm a many moons ago type of guy. But you can assume that the walls are there, right? Wylock, the DM Scotty, DMG, they all made the ones with the walls there. I don't want to leave anybody out. But this is your generic dungeon room. Closed space is because you're in a closed, confined space. And even buildings, mage towers, they're all considered closed space, especially caves, right? Now, the reason that it was called negative space is because you're taking a void and you're basically carving out the space that your players are going to occupy. But to begin with, it's a negative space. It's a void, right? There's nothing there. I mean, there's the obvious. But for your game purposes, there's nothing there. So that's why it's called negative space. So how do the dungeon rooms play into it? Because we've all crafted the 3x3, the 2x2 tiles, and then had to spend an hour basically constructing the whole dungeon, right? And you want to construct the whole thing because it takes so long. You don't want to do it on the fly because your players are there basically waiting for you to do it, right? And that's one of the advantages of the dungeon room, is that it's quicker. You throw these rooms down faster. So I think what happens sometimes with closed space is when you put a whole dungeon out for your players feel inclined to really search through it. Because if you have considerate players, they're gonna enter every room, right? Because if your terrain is out and you have around your friends, yeah, sure, we make fun of each other, whatever, we kick it, whatever. But overall, it's like, hey, here's my boy, and they did all this stuff, so I'm gonna do it because he created this stuff. And we don't want that. We don't want that. We want them to skip these rooms if they want to. So that's the closed space. It's very straightforward. You have everything connects, and even if you do connect everything, you can use it as one large arena type room, right? Because a room or room design, encounter design, is not limited to its space. It's only limited into its theme. It's what's happening at that moment. It could span across different terrain, right? Like, for instance, you could have a monster and then the portal opens up and then you traverse into a whole nother land, but you're still in that encounter. That whole room design is still one, even though you're skipping into different types of environments or biomes or whatever it is. And even if you're switching monsters out, like you have an animated armor or something and it destroyed, but come to find out it's the animated sword or the beholder that's in it, whatever it is that you dream up, that is the room, the encounter. So your closed space can have that. It can have exploration in it if you want. It could be its own room basically with its own dynamics where maybe you're running back and forth between the smaller rooms in the grand room design. So closed space is not closed minded. You still have a lot of flexibility in it, but in overall, it cut me off on that last bit of sentence there, but we're gonna skip into open space. Now, what's open space? It's the opposite, right? You have the wilderness, right? So you can find this by a 2x2 or 3x3 area where you're saying, yeah, you know what? You could really go wherever you want, but the action is here. The action is spotlight here. So how do you use the dungeon rooms with this design, right? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. One way to do it is by actually putting this stuff out in the wilderness. So let's say you have a forest area and then you put the dungeon rooms down to represent ruins, right? And side note, might need some walls down, huh? Anyway, oh, foreshadowing. Either way, you have this concrete area, you have that. But now, if you're in a forest area, that's more aesthetic. So let's flip it. Let's do a flooded area or a swamp area where all of the non-room space or the stone space is water and maybe it's waist high. So you get this situation where if you want to cross the water, you might have dangerous. So maybe you're going to jump to the other side or you're going to walk across the 10-foot pole. You know, either way, now you're creating something environmental in this open space. And what this basically is, open space, the opposite. You have a large area, you're going to fill it in with scattered terrain and stuff. There's really no void unless you create some type of mountain in the middle or something where they can't penetrate in. But usually that comes with some type of elevation. Other ways to use open space and the dungeon rooms is to create either bridges. Maybe you have two bridges side by side, you know, and you're going to use them. And then the negative space, which is really not negative space, but that open space becomes a drop. And you could do the same concept with a chasm. Maybe it's a little different. Or maybe they're just like spires with tops on them and the drop is far too, right? And we're in a fantasy setting, so you can really do whatever you want. Whatever it is, you have the room set on some type of underlayment. And with that, the underlayment becomes whatever you really want it to be. And there you have an open space, right? So you can have this chasm and you can have an aerial monster however you want, right? And the sky's the limit. Pun intended. So lastly, I'm going to introduce the third concept, which I call the hybrid concept. It's a kind of a hybrid between that negative and positive space, but I think it falls more into the open space realm. But here's basically the concept. And again, disclaimer, this is untested. I've yet to try it out to see how it works, to see its flaws. So if you see something or something comes to your head like, that's not going to work, Nick, what you thinking, man? Leave it down below. It's all right. I could take it. Big boy. So what's the hybrid? The hybrid is something more for maybe buildings where everything is kind of jam-packed. You don't have these long corridors, but you do have corridors inside the building, right? So maybe you have a room, you have a corridor of like 3 doors, right? And it really supports the exploration, but what's happening is you're using these rooms to put down, and they're just single rooms, and you're gonna have whatever you're gonna have. Maybe they're connecting. This is the choice, and this is the flexibility of the dungeon rooms, right? You do it however you want, but the negative space, now your underlayment, for me, is the black felt, but that becomes your corridor, so that if you're gonna have this encounter in the corridors, let's say you're in a haunted house and the pictures start moving, right? Whoever's in the corridor is going to see that, but if they're not, they're not. But they have the flexibility to do it. So you put your rooms in a way that kind of outlines those corridors. Now, here's one drawback that I can see. Sometimes, depending on your layout or however you put it down, those corridors might not seem, to know where they end, basically. So you might have trouble and just say, hey, put it here. And, oh man, side note, I think this might be where I might make walls. That's 2. Anyway, that's it. So that was the basic 3 ways that I could think of to utilize the dungeon rooms to the maximum. And this is just a set of we'll call them tiles, just for namesake. But dungeon rooms, I call them, because they're bigger. You're not doing 3x3. We're doing 6x6, 6x12, or 12x12s. And then even if we want to make bigger ones, we're gonna put them together. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for spending your time. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the love, comments, support that I've gotten, and I just look forward to keep doing what I'm doing and to help people get to the table and to help people just fellowship and just have a good time with friends. So, signing out.